ברוכים הבאים לכולם. Welcome everyone. After some internet problems with our translator, everyone is here now. היו קצת בעיות חיבורי אינטרנט, כולם פה עכשיו. שמי יעל שקד, אני עובדת סוציאלית ומנהלת את מרכז הגישור והדיאלוג בקהילה של המועצה אזורית עמק חפר. My name is Yael Shaked, and I am a social worker and manage the עמק חפר Municipal Mediation and Dialogue Center. אני מתרגשת להציג את הדוברים שלנו היום מ-CJI, ארגון צדק קהילתי בווטרלו, אונטוריו, קנדה. נירן אקיטונדה, רכז שירות הסולחה בארגון, וג'ולי פרישין, מנהלת תוכנית גישור ויישוב סכסוכים. I am thrilled to introduce our speakers today from the Community Justice Initiative, CJI, of Waterloo Region, Ontario, Canada. Niran Akitunde, Sulha Service Coordinator, and Julie Friesen, Director of Programs, Conflict Resolution and Mediation Services. הדוברים יציגו במשך כחצי שעה וישירו זמן בסוף לשאלות. בסוף ההרצאה תוחזרו באופן אוטומטי להרצאה המסכמת במליאה. במהלך ההצגה יוצג תרגום לעברית בצ'אט. על מנת שלא להפריע לכולם בקריאת התרגום ובמהלך ההרצאה, אם ברצונכם לשאול שאלות, אנא שמרו אותם לסוף בצ'אט, או שלחו לי אותם בפרטי במהלך ההרצאה. אני אאסוף את השאלות ואציג אותם למרצים כשיגיע הזמן לכך. ניתן לרשום שאלות בעברית או באנגלית. אנא יישארו בהשתק במהלך ההרצאה, על מנת לא להפריע למהלכה התקין. The speakers will present for approximately 30 minutes, leaving time for your questions. At the end of the session, you will automatically be redirected to the concluding keynote lecture. Throughout the talk, there will be a direct translation in the chat section. In order to ensure the flow of the presentation translation, if you do have questions, please keep them to the end or write them to me in private in the chat. I will gather your questions and present them to the speakers when appropriate. You can write your questions in Hebrew or English. Please keep your mics muted during the presentation in order not to interfere throughout. Niran and Julie, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Jan. And it's great to see so many of you on the screen. Niran and I chose not to have a PowerPoint presentation. There was some written material that we did provide just in case that's interesting for you to have with you later as you reflect on our time together. So I'll begin, and then Niran will join and pop in and add to that with his wisdom and knowledge. I do want to start first, though, with a land acknowledgement. This is how we start our meetings and our events in Canada. And this is one small step that I take to acknowledge Indigenous peoples on whose land that I live. So as we pause together and we acknowledge all the lands that we live on, let's remember to hold respect for the land itself. Because when the land, the water, and the animals are not well, that means the humans are not well as well. I hold immense gratitude and respect for the Indigenous nations who steward the lands on which I live. They've kept a sacred covenant of responsibility for this land for generations. Where I live, these nations are the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral Peoples. That also involves the 6 nations, which are the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, the Seneca, and the Tuscarora. I'm Indigenous and I'm a treaty person. My right to be on this land is governed by the Haldeman Tract, and I remember that the First Nations did not cede or relinquish sovereignty or their relationship to the land, but that they rather agreed to share this land with me and others like me. So thank you for that and for hearing about some of the folks on whose land that I live. I want to tell you a little bit about, when we talked about what we would do today, I wanted to give you just a little piece about who we are at Community Justice Initiatives. And then I'm going to talk again very shortly about community mediation in Ontario and a little bit of in Canada as well. And then I'm going to pass it over to Niran, who's going to tell you a bit about what we call our SULA project that works with situations of hate and hate incidents. So Community Justice Initiatives, we're located in Woterloo region in Ontario, Canada. And we call ourselves CJI because our name is too long and confusing. So when I say CJI, that's relating to our organization. So we began in 1974 with what is known as the Elmira case. So this is known a bit worldwide, where it was the first time a dialogue occurred in a criminal case in the sort of Western style justice system. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with the term restorative justice, but that really is the heart of everything that we do at CJI. So with restorative justice, we do work with criminal situations and criminal incidents. And that really, the idea is that we look at crime and harm, not as a violation of a law, but as a violation of relationships or a breaking down of relationship. So for example, if someone enters your home and they steal something from their home, obviously they've violated the law, but it's also a violation of a relationship. So even if you didn't know that person who stole something from you, you have a relationship with that person as a fellow citizen or a neighbor. So we continue to work alongside our community to look at how do we transform harm, and look at how harm and conflict, crime and abuse impacts relationships that we have. And so we look, instead of just punishing people, we offer dialogue opportunities, or we offer opportunities for people to get to know each other. And they can talk about what's important to them, what happened from their perspective, how they've been impacted, what does accountability look like to them, and how they themselves, the participants themselves in this dialogue, may be able to find their way to begin to look at what they want to see as next steps, or how they might move forward together. It was really interesting listening to the presentation that we just had. We talk about that we do come from a transformative perspective, and we teach empowerment and recognition in our training to our community members who facilitate these dialogues. And so it really is about walking with people and following what they want to see, if they even want to be a part of it. So it's always invitational. Everything that we do is about listening to people first, and offer that listening ear to people. And then offering what sort of dialogue gifts that we can offer people, and see if that fits for them, if this will help them, if they feel like this could be moving them forward in some way. So we also talk about this idea, not only restorative justice, but also restorative practice. And I know that there's probably lots of different ways to think about these two things. But when we talk about it, it's just to help people think beyond just criminal incidences. So sometimes in our community, people hear about us and they think, oh, they only deal with crime or justice issues. But what's really important to us is this idea of relationships, is to really think about how we create relationships, how we maintain relationships, how we mend relationships that are broken. This idea that we are interconnected with each other, and how can we lift that up and help our community lift up this idea that we rely on each other and that we are interconnected. So we do lots of different things at CJI, but to kind of very quickly talk about it, is that we have lots of different dialogue services. So we have a community mediation service. We have what we call our victim offender reconciliation program, which is that dialogue opportunity in criminal incidences. We have an elder mediation service that works specifically with older adults. We help families have dialogues, workplaces, basically all sections of our life where we have relationship, which is everywhere. And obviously there is opportunity whenever you have relationship for that to be have difficult conversations with each other, or to have connections. So that's a bit of what we do in the dialogue part. And we also take this idea of restorative practice, which is about providing opportunities for people who normally don't talk with each other, who normally don't dialogue, and providing intentional spaces for people to do things with each other to build relationship. So we do this work with, we have a local women's prison in our community. And so what we do is we bring community members into that prison, and we provide, all we do is provide a space. Sometimes we provide something to do, and we let people form friendships with each other. So that's the other idea of this restorative practice, providing spaces for folks who normally don't get to connect, to have these sorts of conversations. We also work with folks with sexual harm, and provide, again, dialogue opportunities that people don't normally have opportunities to do, as well as looking at newcomer youth in our community, youth who are new to our community, and providing those same opportunities to build relationships with youth who are already living in our community. that's a little bit about who we are at CJI, and I'm going to try to keep it shorter. I'm going to tell you a little bit about community mediation in Ontario. So CJI, we're one of the members of the Ontario Community Mediation Coalition. So this is an affiliation of different community mediation services, some in Toronto, some in Sudbury, which is quite north, some in Windsor, which is almost at the US border. We're sort of all spread across Ontario. And in Canada, there's also community mediation services in different provinces. So what I will tell you is that when I was speaking with some folks from Israel, is I thought, there's so many more in Israel. And there's a really big reason for that, which is funding is very difficult to get here for community mediation services. So it is not elevated in a government way or any other way to talk about how do we help community members resolve conflict. Now, we do have sort of mandatory mediation, which we're not a part of as an agency, within family courts and small claims courts and things like that. But around different relationships that are broken, it's very difficult to find funding. In fact, CJI is probably one of the best funded organizations. And so we are rare. And so I guess I wanted to tell you a little bit about that, and that I'm jealous of your communities, which seem to have a lot of support to do this work. I am going to pass it over to Niran, who's going to talk more about one of our newer projects, which is called Sula.
Thank you very much, Julie, and greetings to everybody. I am happy to be here to talking about Sula, and I'm going to start by just the name Sula. Sula, it's not English, even though Canada it's Western, and the whole idea is to give ownership to those who have direct experience of what the issues around Sula is. So Sula is synonymous to different meanings, but at the core of every interpretation is peace seeking, peace building, reconciliation, and I like the name as well because of the community that we serve. They are able to relate to what it means. But in terms of how Sula evolved in the way we use it, specifically in this particular program. So in 2019, there was this high level of Islamophobia in Woterloo region, and community justice initiatives and the Coalition of Muslim Women, were part of this organization that is called the Crime Prevention Council. It's a conglomerate of different community organizations. But this specific conversation was around how can we intervene in a way that at least can deal or address this issue of Islamophobia. So there was a committee that was set up, and in that committee there was a resolution that Sula should be founded to have a direct impact on ways in which Islamophobia can be addressed. But it goes beyond just Islamophobia because of the nature of hate. It can come in different forms. It can come in form of racism. And it's also possible just because of the intersectionality, the way some of these hate incidents really interwovenly connect to one another. So we said, okay, it's important to put Islamophobia in front of the issues we are going to be addressing, and also racism. And that creates this opportunity for Coalition of Muslim Women of Kitchener-Waterloo and the Community Justice Initiative to start this project. And the relationship between the members of the Coalition of Muslim Women of Kitchener-Waterloo with their members who are predominantly Muslims, because they understand the issues, they know what it means to feel Islamophobia. And then from the point of view of community justice initiative, we are looking at how best can we approach these issues around Islamophobia and racism and other forms of prejudice in a way that does not shut down conversation, but that creates opportunity for dialogue, that creates opportunity for learning, that creates opportunity for someone to at least be accountable for their conduct. And at the heart of every conversation, there's the need for social relationship. So the community is still, you know, together, even while we are talking about the things that divide us. So that is the central idea behind Sula. And the nature of that conversation has continued to help communities to be able to talk about the impact of racism, identity differences, in a way that unites us and not divide us. And Sula enhances the administration of criminal justice system by improving the quality of our justice system in holding offenders accountable. It addresses the harm of the victim while strengthening relational connections in our communities. Then, if you look at the overall impact or ramification of that, is that one, there'll be less reliance in the way we go to the formal criminal justice system, which is where we go and the most, the most focus is paid on who are we going to punish today? Are you guilty or you're not guilty? And if you're guilty, we send you to jail. That is the only solution that you can get from the formal criminal justice system. But the SULA gives opportunity because if you are members of the same community, it is better to talk because you cannot wish one person away. You want to be together. You want to talk together. And that ramification you can also see in the way the court system is relieved of the burden of every case is going to court or every incident results in charges. So these are, and the way the Canadian law recognizes the use of alternative measures has also enabled the use of restorative justice approach, which is that alternative non-adversarial way to talk about incident, including incidents of AIDS. So instead of going through the formal criminal justice system, the law under section 717 of the criminal code allows the use of alternative measures. And we can then use the restorative justice approach to discuss or bring issues of SULA, which is issues that boils down to racism, Islamophobia. And it is not an answer to every conversation around identity harm. That needs to be stressed. It is a voluntary process where people come together for possible conversation around the impact of what they've experienced from another person's conduct, maybe by way of attacking their person. Someone is at, maybe hate just because of your faith as a Muslim or any other religion, or someone hates just because of your skin color, or someone hates just because of the sexuality. So there are so many issues that can come through this platform. It is our collective responsibility in our various communities to create society where we listen to people's stories. Because when you get to know people, you learn more about them. Some of the assumptions that you hold about their faith, about who they are in terms of race or ethnicity, about their sexuality, you get to see through their lens the life that they choose or the life that they have lived. And then maybe when you interact, you can learn. And when you learn, there's growth. So that's how Sula has been able to connect people from different communities, whether it is Black communities, the Muslim communities, to talk and learn, and then growth can happen. I could talk about this for several hours. Please, I would hope that we would get questions so we can make this more interactive. Thank you very much.
אז אם יש שאלות, הם מעדיפים לעשות את זה יותר אינטראקטיבי, אז אפשר לרשום בצ'אט, בעברית או באנגלית. If you do have questions, the speakers prefer this to be a more interactive session, so you can write them in the chat, either in Hebrew or in English. Okay. So one of the things they're asking for examples. If you can give an example of a specific process that you had in the community.
Niran, you want to take that one?
Yes, I would love to take that. So let me give a typical example of how Sula can be relevant. Okay, so let's say there's a conflict between two very good old friends. Let's say they grew up together, actually. But you cannot wish away conflict. That is life. Conflict it's part of life. It's what you do with conflicts that matters. So these two, good friends had this serious altercation. And in the process, one person maybe refers to the other in a way that talks about his skin color, for example, in a very not pleasant way. And the other person reacts by just maybe pushing that person in a violent way. And in that situation, one person calls the police. The police will show up, but the police will see the violence because that is what the law is. You should not, attack another person, right? And while the court is looking at, okay, or the police is looking at, we are going to prefer charges against what you have done because of the violent conduct. And the other person says, but what about the emotional attack on me? What about the racial attack on me? What about that thing that provoked me? And the court is also looking at, what about the fact that these people have been friends? What happens to the relationship? What happens to the two families that they knew these two kids? They even sleep in their different houses at different times growing up. What can we do? Should we just send one person to jail? What happens to that? The dynamic nature of the relationship. And they ask them, what do you want out of all of this? And the person who was attacked said, there's no way I want him to go to jail. I don't want to send him, but I want him at least to recognize that what he has done is wrong. And they asked the other person, what do you feel? He said, this person attacked who I am. He called me a name about my skin color. And that is what, and I want him to also learn that that's not how to speak to people. You don't need to attack my identity to prove a point. And the court looks at, okay, we value the relationship. We don't want these people to go to jail. How can we get them to talk? So creating, and they come to Sula. And we create that space for both of them to have dialogue about the things that affected them in that relationship, in that experience, in that incident. And when they talk, they will talk based on what they need. One person will say, I need an apology for what has been done to me. The other person would say, but I need him to listen to me, to hear why he should not refer to me in a certain way based on my skin color. you see, that conversation is happening. It's not only thinking about punishing one, it's creating opportunity for dialogue, to speak to things that ordinarily you would not get under the formal criminal justice system, which is adversarial, is combative, is that you're guilty or not guilty. So that is how SULA would, be relevant to that kind of conversation. Please, Julie, if you have something to say to this.
Yeah, and I would say that a lot of, again, we're still pretty early in marketing this opportunity, and I think that what we have seen, and I think what we'll continue to see, is folks who live in housing that is very close to each other, but they come from different countries and different cultures, and their kids play in the little playground of that housing complex. We've been seeing more and more of those particular situations. And the challenge is, and we have volunteers, we have both Muslim and volunteers from the wider community together. We always use a co-mediation model, which I think you do as well. So we always have two folks, facilitating these conversations. And, they'll be hopefully, a bit representative of different cultures like us, as facilitators in these situations, modeling that we can do this together, that we can have these dialogues, and we're never going to 100% understand each other, but we can move towards that. And so we're, as part of our project, we also hope to have proactive community conversation circles as part of this. The issue is that we're still dealing with COVID here. And so we have a ton of restrictions, and we're still not able to gather in person for these types of conversations. But as we begin to open up, these are some things that we want to do. How can we help our community that feels very fractured right now? And we've had a number of really disturbing situations happening here of Islamophobia, and other types of racism. And so how can we as a community have these conversations where folks will be willing and not feel like they are going to be labeled as a racist or Islam, but will feel welcome to say, this is about a learning and a conversation with each other. So it's been interesting to train our volunteers as well, because we anticipate, we're formally putting ourselves out there saying, hey, in situations of Islamophobia or racism, so we're actually naming things. And so we're really trying to figure out and teach our volunteers about how can you help people have these conversations so they're not coming in, with a really defensive tone, but are coming in knowing that, we are going to hold you in positive regard as well. With others, to see how can we learn together, and how can we talk about what's important to us in these particular situations.
Wonderful. I think you've touched it a bit in your answer now. One of the other questions, I think maybe it wasn't clear from the beginning, said that sulha that you're talking about sounds like the Arab word sulha, which, and they were asking if it's based on the sulha practices.
Yeah, so we chose the word actually from our conversations with our partner here, the Coalition for Muslim Women, who said, this is our word for what we do when we're broken, when our relationships are broken, and we have a responsibility to come together and work things out. And that could look different, right? You may involve other people in that, or that could look different depending on what it is. But this was like this, for us, they said, this is where this touches our heart, right? That we understand this concept. So yes, it's sort of different than what you're maybe familiar with, but that's just where it was chosen, as Niran said, about this idea of how can we try to stitch back together fabric when it's been torn apart, and when relationships have been torn apart. How do we mend that? It's never going to look the same, but how do we give people these opportunities to consider using time to get to know each other to try to mend that?
So Another question is, how is the sulha process, the way you have it, how does it differ from regular mediation?
I'll start, and then Niran, I think you also have something to join in. So our regular mediation's also kind of pushing towards this, but I would say in the Sula, we really talk about opening up values initially. So some dialogue processes do this as part of it. So we really encourage participants, and we prepare them for that in our case development processes, our meetings before that, is that let's build the values that are important to us before we have a conversation. So we really take time to think about and to sort of name things. So we actually help people think about, you know, what is important to you? What does respect mean? And of course that could come up in a regular dialogue too, but that is one of the first things that we try to do in these particular situations, is to really build a container where we're talking about the deep things that matter to us, the values that we hold, not just what happened in this particular situation, but who we are and what we elevate as goals. So that's one slight change, as well as, you know, we always sort of name the racism or Islamophobia. We make sure that's named in the case development and people feel comfortable about what that might be. Whereas, you know, we wouldn't necessarily sort of go there in a regular mediation. But make sure that we really are preparing people for so that they have a time to think about what is important to me in this, and how might I want to present myself in this. And so do a lot of preparation about some of those things. So Niran, I'm sure you can add to that.
So the most important, you know, point in terms of how we engage in that conversation is to recognize the issues, and usually identity is usually at the center of some of these incidents, and it could also be based on maybe bias or prejudice, you know, that everyone has prejudice, everyone has bias, but how can we talk about what we are feeling towards another person in a way that discern, you know, us from, you know, holding that, you know, belief or assumption about them, in a way that you put that in action that eventually harm someone. You know, can you actually be willing to talk about some of these issues without shutting people down? Um, so you don't say someone is you're a racist. Uh, how can you have a conversation when you know, when you know you already shut down the conversation? You know, so the way Sula respond is to create an avenue for people to actually engage, to learn, to be willing to share their thoughts, and also to also take accountability. You know, where you think you're wrong. So it's more of two people deciding that they actually want to engage, then while we are holding that space for them to do that, to have that conversation in a way that you know, meets their needs for that type of conversation. So yeah, so it also, apart from just, you know, just talking about it in mediation, even awareness that you bring to some of these issues, you know, because some people might just have that you know, assumption from maybe what they read in the news, from media, and they conclude based on that. I mean, they don't understand the concept of, for example, hijab, and they just begin to, you know, react to what they've read, you know, or the news they've consumed, or the information they, you know, but when you sit together, when you get to hear from a Muslim person or from someone from another religion, what it means to them, maybe that could create a shift in the way you look at things, in your perspectives, you know. So that's how we hold space for that type of conversation.
We're also trying to do this work in partnership with community organizations who are on the front lines of advocating. So for example, the partnership that we have with the Coalition of Muslim Women, the reason why we have that partnership is manyfold, but one of those reasons is that, you know, we have folks who are doing community events on these particular issues. And so what we can do is, you know, have people engage who may not understand the hijab or things like that with our partners' events. And so it's like a holistic way to sort of wrap around folks. It's also to, if folks are open to learning more, you know, we have a partner that we're very close with who has these sorts of events. And the way that they hold these events are very invitational to the wider community to join. And so we continue to build relationships with many other community organizations and do it in a way where we really are approaching how we approach our particular situations, whereas we're listening first and we're asking what's important to these organizations and these communities. And we're talking about what's important to us and what our values are. And then we're saying, is there a connection here? Is there a way to connect with each other that is a way that's good for both of our organizations? And so we hope to continue to build these sorts of community partnerships so that we are not just an organization doing this on our own, but we're doing this with community as we do that. Of course, we're also engaging with community volunteers who are representative of these communities as well, but also the organizations to say, we as a community want to see our region as one where folks can have these conversations, folks can have these opportunities to actually meet each other. And that's not just through Sula from our organization, that's through other events that are going on. And, you know, it sometimes seems very small, and we seem to take steps backwards when things happen and when events happen and people feel unsafe as a result of those things. But we still say we are moving forward in providing these opportunities. And the more and more that we do this, the more and more that people will care. Because I don't know about you, but I start caring once I start to know someone. I start caring more about them because I can, I have like a connection to it, a very personal connection to why this should be important to me.
And just to kind of very briefly just say, one of the works that the Coalition of Muslim Women of Kitchener Woterloo is leading in this work is to have peer educators, like 10 of them with 10 different languages into the different communities. So it's not a we are here to save you approach. It's also empowering the different communities on the importance of dialogue in a way that reflects Sula. So they have so many, you know, creative ways of reaching the communities. Like they started the hate reporting tool where you can, you know, if you experience hate, you can report and they can advise you on what to do. So these are initiatives to reach the communities, to give them that sense of ownership of this project.
And in one of our previous conversations, you said, I believe it started with the Muslim Coalition of Women, but today it's not only towards Muslims, right? You use this process that you do. You use it with you were talking about Asian hatred around COVID, and is that correct? So
that's right. Yeah. So and again, building those sort of partnerships with community to do that work. You know, obviously this is a journey, so we continue to learn and how to sort of support these conversations in better ways. So we are not experts at this. We are learning as we are going along. And also, you know, we you know, the very extreme examples of hate in our community, well, folks probably will, I mean, because everything is voluntary, people have to choose to be a part of this. You know, we may not get those sorts of incidents and situations, but you never know if you can reach something early on where children are playing of different cultures in a playground at a housing like apartment complex and that can either leave them with a hateful feeling in some of those, or it can leave them with a feeling of curiosity and learning. And I think that's what we hope to do here, is to say that we can have these conversations, we can talk about these things in ways that promote learning. And there may not always be a perfect resolution at the end, like our previous conversation talked about. But what it can do is it can help us learn more about each other, and we think that's a small step forward, and hopefully being a prevention for more serious situations later on.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, Julie and Niran. The session was inspiring, intriguing, very relevant to so many of the issues we deal with here in Israel. תודה רבה לנירן וג'ולי על המפגש המרתק והמאוד רלוונטי לנו פה בישראל בהרבה דרכים. In 2 minutes you will be redirected, and not 2 minutes, in about 7 minutes you will be automatically redirected to our closing session with Michael Tsur, who will be speaking about the art of asking questions. Everyone's welcome to continue and stay for the final wonderful session. בעוד מספר דקות תחזרו באופן אוטומטי למליאה, שם נשמע את מיכאל צור בנושא של אומנות שאלת השאלות. מוזמנים כולם להישאר להרצאה המסכמת. Thank you again for the wonderful talk, and I look forward to continuing working with you.
Yes, and if anyone ever has any questions or wants to reach out, hopefully you will reach out to Niran or me, and we would be pleased to have conversations. I assume we have things to learn from you, and would really welcome that.
Thank you.